Hello everyone, I'm Russell. I'm here to introduce Ondi Timoner, the filmmaker. Let's give her a round of applause. Thank you. We're here to have a conversation about the film. I'm sure you all enjoyed it. It's a very sort of moving and powerful film, and yet, Ondi, your intention wasn't originally to release it as a film. What was your original motivation in recording the events leading to your father's death?
I was terrified to lose my father and to forget his voice and his personality, and I just wanted to bottle him up somehow. So I asked him if I could film, and he said, "I instinctively know you're on the right track." I went to see a therapist because I was worried that I was mediating or trying to protect myself, or that I was going to hurt my family in the process. And I fully expected her to say, "This is a terrible idea." And she said, you know, "If you feel you should film, you should film." So I asked my sister, because she's a rabbi, as you, well, you know, you just saw the film. And so she was on her way out, and we asked her, and she said it wouldn't be my preference. You know, she really believes that the sacred should be private. And but it was important to Dad at that point. He wanted it. And Mom said she was very comforted to know that something of him would be here after he was gone. And so Rachel said, as soon as they said that, she said, "My concerns are not as important, and I'm just going to forget about the cameras." And what was happening there was so intense and amazing and beautiful during that time. It was the most beautiful space I've ever inhabited. And so the cameras just kind of became part of the furniture as much as they could be.
The film, I think, is a lot about rituals, religious rituals, bureaucratic rituals, medical rituals, and I suppose to you, as a devoted filmmaker, the process of filmmaking is ritualized also. How did you find that these various sets of rituals complemented each other and conflicted with one another?
Well, I think that Rachel, my sister, really brought incredible age-old rituals that I had no idea about. Even though we had grown up Jewish, we weren't very religious. And Rachel sort of had a calling long after she was out of the house. My dad was the kind of Jew that would sneak out of the back of the temple. So he really, I think that as we approach death, now that I've been through this, I think the veil almost lifts or thins, and we can see, because Dad went from really agnostic and thinking nothing would exist after he died, and that's what I flash back to in October 2020, 6 months prior. And then by the time he's there, he's turning to, you know, Judaism again, like as when he was a child. He's seeing his parents on the other side, and he's sure he's going to see us and be watching over us with such certainty and such confidence that I can only think that he could see something then. And her tapping into that was something that I think was so important for our family. I mean, I've heard my son, who's 19, say that the singing on the day Dad died was just such a comfort to him, you know, and that we could all sing together, tucking Dad in with the dirt. You know, the idea of also just how open we were, I think, was really a lesson I wanted to share. I was just bottling him up, but then I decided at a certain point when I was editing a memorial video that was supposed to be 5 minutes long, and it turned into a 32-minute memorial video, that what happened in that room was so profound, you know, that it would be almost unethical not to share it, because we all have to, none of us gets out of here alive. You know, we all have to die, and we all have to say goodbye to our loved ones. And I thought Rachel's deathbed confessional with Dad, you know, and when she admonishes me for trying to help, I left it in because it's great learning that we can't take people's shame. They have to release it themselves, you know, and things that I learned so much, you know, and I felt like, I think a lot of those lessons are in there. So the ritual of filmmaking, I think, you know, for me has always been entering into worlds I could never otherwise enter, or learning immense amounts of things, and then taking what I learn and distilling it down and then sharing it. Like, in that holistic process is something I've been fascinated by and just addicted to for 30 years, you know.
Yeah, and I suppose that's, given that you've said that, then, if you typically see yourself as an interloper and sort of an invader in the worlds that you are covering in your films, how does it feel to be engaging in something so private, intimate and familial, or did you discover in there novelties that makes, in a sense, tourists of us all?
I felt that I was inviting you into our living room to be with our family and to meet the most extraordinary person I've ever known. My original impossible visionary. You know, I made a film about you and I called you an impossible visionary. Like, the idea of an impossible visionary to me is somebody who just takes on the impossible and just won't stop at anything for their vision, and they can see something that we can't necessarily see at the time. And Dad was always like that, and he led with such love. And so for me, you know, it felt very much like I wanted you to be able to get to know him, but I also wanted you to be able to, in the intimate details, see your own lives, your own families. You know, that's the miracle of film, is that really the more intimate, the more that one can relate. You'd think that if you kept it general, there'd be more space to relate, but it's actually in the details. And so, yeah, I mean, you know, the response that we've received is that it helps people a lot. And that turned my sister around also, seeing my mom watch it every day, seeing my mom watch it every night for a year to spend time with my dad, and how it healed her and helped her. And then seeing people be healed and reunite with their parents and things like that. Now she's like, you know, sort of turned around, and now she's like, I get the power of film now. I've been making a film about her for like 3 years, and my job just got a lot easier because
getting better access now.
Yeah, she's like, okay, where do you want the mic? Where do you want the camera? You know.
You said that that you in a therapeutic concern that was raised that making the film might mediate the experience in a way that somehow inoculated you from the potency of the event or somehow distanced you from it, and yet this same process of mediation, from which of course the word media, like to which media has an example, in the case of your mother, was a kind of cartilage and a kind of connection. What has the film become for you since making it? How has it helped you to frame your father's death?
It's really made me question what is life and what is death. In a way, he's more alive now than he was at certain times when he was struggling the most and most isolated, especially during COVID, which was very hard on the elderly. And he was falling quite a lot, and he was struggling quite a lot. And now when I was sitting in front of the Avid and I was cutting, I was realizing I was laughing and crying and grieving in a way with a dimension that I don't think many people ever get to experience, because he was where he wanted to be. He was no longer suffering, and I could spend time with him. And now, as you know, my mother will fly to New York tomorrow. I'll meet her there for our Doc NYC screenings, and she gets to see and share her beloved husband with, you know, with audiences, and then he lives in their hearts. And it's just this unbelievable process and his courage in the face of all this is helping people to face death, and by understanding our mortality and that this is a finite journey, I think our lives have an opportunity to become richer. So the response is just so overwhelming of like love around this film, that I think it's actually, in a way, it's kept Dad alive. In a way, you know, it's very interesting. But he spent, 40 years being the most positive person anyone could ever know, and he never complained. Maybe 5 times ever that I heard him complain. So when he finally desperately asked us to go, we had to honor his wishes, even though it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. He said he'd know where my son was going to go to college, and I said, Dad, you said you're going to know where, Juki hasn't heard back yet. And he's like, oh, I'll be watching. I got to go. Yeah. He said, I served my sentence. That's what he said.
Yeah, that's one of some of the things I was struck by was the way that how resolute your father was, having made that decision in spite of the numerous layers of inquiry, by the novelty of the circumstances, in that it was an elective process that sort of I've not really seen recorded or documented in that way, and yet it is, in a sense, as you've said, utterly mundial in that it's inevitable and unavoidable for all of us. I thought that distance was traversed remarkably well, making it sort of extraordinarily special, but also this is a normal death with a man surrounded by his loving family.
How normal is that, though? That's the thing, is how normal is that, right? I mean, so many people die isolated and or painfully. You know, I mean, there was pain in the very end, and I left that in so that the conversation about how we do this can evolve, because I mean, it needs to happen. I mean, it's only a law in 9 states in America, and in Canada they have medical aid in dying. Here, it's not a right. You don't have the right. For terminally ill patients cannot elect to end their own lives.
I think too many of us would go for it.
But it is a basic human right. I never thought about it before, but I think it's, you know, along the lines of Roe v. Wade and the right to choose to have an abortion. It's sort of like, you know, it's a right over our own bodies, right? And so I saw how it helped my father. The agency that it gave him, it just turned his spirits to finally have power over something, you know, to be able to determine a date. And he said to me, Ondi, would you rather get a call in the middle of the night, or would you rather know? And I had to say I'd rather know. And the time that we spent was a gift. I mean, an absolute gift, because the grandkids could come home from college, get out of school, whatever they needed to do, and sit around the bed. And so often we wait until after the person's dead to bring the kids to the funeral, because gosh, we don't want to scare them with all that, you know? These kids are so happy that they got that time with Dad. I mean, when Eitan asked Dad, how should I live, you know, and he hears, respect those you don't know and love the ones you do. It's just so simple, but it's like, he'll never, you know, his life has changed from that. It's precious, you know, absolutely precious. I don't know that I've ever had there's a time of my life that I've actually appreciated more. There's pure presence in that room, absolute pure presence. Yeah, it was really something.
Yeah, plainly. It's also a political film as well as a spiritual one then on that basis in its advocacy for this elective procedure, and I suppose in terms of the sort of evident hue of the familial political persuasion. So, but do you want it to be sort of a universal and unifying film, given its themes, as well as one that takes a sort of a very definite perspective on that subject at least, and perhaps, as you've just said in your last answer, perhaps along other political lines more tangentially?
Well, I think that we hope as a family that this will be, that I couldn't take away Dad's suffering. It's something that I carried my whole life, was that I couldn't help the fact that he was ousted from the company, that there were no disability protections. When they went bankrupt, I mean, I tried to do everything. That house is a house I own, you know, that I gave them. There was nothing to take away his suffering, though, at the end of the day. But now, if his story can actually take the suffering away for tens of thousands of terminally ill patients and their families, who are just, you know, they want to have this right. I never thought about it before, but after going through it, you know, we would be so happy. It's in front of 21 states, I think, 22 states, including New York. It's been sitting there for like 7 years now. So if my dad, you know, lived in New York where he was born, or my sister is, she wouldn't have that right. But if you're in New Jersey, you have the right, you know, but you can't go from New York to New Jersey and have it done, or just, you know, so it's all very fragmented and something I think we don't think about or talk about because we're scared of death. So I didn't make it for political reasons, but I think sometimes the most personal can become the best political tool, but I didn't make it for that reason.
While your father never wavered after his initial decision, were there points that you felt doubtful, and where in particular did you prevaricate or feel uncertain?
When it's in the film, when I realized it was March 1st. when I had to sign, when he was signing the death contract, we call that scene the death contract. It was devastating to me because it was like, I don't know, it just felt further away because it was March 3rd and we were in February, you know, and suddenly we were in March and I was like, 2 days? I thought the earth might open and swallow me whole. I mean, he was my best friend. He was my pal. He was my champion. I'm the middle child. I was always in trouble. He was always getting me out of trouble, you know. He understood my feistiness and he trusted me and believed in me. And it felt like I was losing my greatest champion, you know. And I have to say, as you asked before, making this film has been really healing for me because I didn't lose him in a certain way, you know, and I've gotten to be able to, he was just put on the unforgettables list of 2022 by Cinema Eye. You know, there's 10 unforgettables. And I just seeing his name there, I was just like, yeah, you know what? He's a hero. You know, he's a hero. He's a leader for all the things that we should be leading for. And, you know, the other funny thing is, Russell, I don't know if you know this, but I wrote a script about him. I've always wanted to tell his story, but I didn't have any archival footage. So all I have of the airline is those like 17 minutes that's in the film.
Yeah.
So my whole career, people are like, well, you love the story of your father and the airline and the stroke and all that impact on the family. Are you going to make that documentary? And I said, I don't have any archival footage to bring him alive. So I wrote a script about 6 years ago, and I even read it to him on his deathbed. That's how little I knew I was making a documentary. I was glad the cameras were going to record his reactions, so I didn't have to write down notes. I could just kind of be with him and read him the script, and we could kind of use it as a vehicle to go through memories. I also set up a slide projector, and we played slides at night, and they would look at slides from the 60s and 70s and reminisce. So I still dream to make that film.
Do you think that it altered your spiritual perspective, the experience, as your father grew more open to a more, if not traditional, as at least a sort of a more vivid and felt understanding or appreciation or anticipation of an afterlife? Were you affected by that? When you say that it was the most present that you had ever felt, what, you know, have you carried much of that with you, and would you term it as spiritual?
Yeah, I'm definitely less scared of death now. There was a moment on the airplane last night where I was like, you know, didn't you get that sometimes when you're flying and you're just like, this thing is a can flying through the air, and I was just like, I could die, and I was just like, okay. You know, it was like, I wasn't scared. I don't know how scared I was before because, again, it wasn't a subject that I delved into much. You know, I'm sort of a present and future type person. I don't focus on mortality very much, but I feel like Dad's experience and his confidence was infectious. You know, his humor till the end was just a gift, you know. It was absolute, the penis button joke, you know. I had so many different jokes I could put in. It was really an embarrassment of riches. There's one joke he tells my sister, and she's in the middle of like a serious, you know, counseling, and he's like, I got a story about a guy who walks into a bar, you know, and she looks over at me. I'm like, I had no crew, by the way. I would just like operate camera whenever anybody else was visiting with him. I'd move cameras around. Otherwise, they just would run out of batteries and so forth. And anyway, I was operating camera, and you just see her look at me like, what do I do now? You know, like, what does he mean? You know, like it was just a sexual joke, and
naturally,
of course.
It's the moment of physical death is sort of really evident and sort of quite a powerful moment in the film. It's very striking how clear it is as a transition. I wonder if that moment had any alchemic impact on you. It's
really interesting. We were facing an obstacle course. It was like Dad had to do some kind of relay race at the end. First they slowed down his lungs, then the heart, you know, and then he's supposed to hold a glass that we had practiced with, but he no longer had the strength to do so, and I'm legally not supposed to touch it, but if he doesn't drink it in 2 minutes, he goes into a coma. I cannot have that, you know, so I'm faced with this like impossible situation where I'm just like, come and get me, you know, of course I'm going to help my dad. So I grab the glass, and then Rachel grabs the glass. You're not going to do this alone. And then David puts his hand on my back, and, you know, it was this terrified. Even with all of that, we couldn't tell whether Dad was going to get the drink down. So once he gets it down, we are relieved because he's reached his goal, you know, and that's what we felt like when he died. We felt like, okay, he got there, but then suddenly he was gone. And it was like a really awful feeling. It was like, but wait, where did he go? But then when I held his arm, it was like a bird's wing. It was so light. It was like, Russell, literally, and you know Juki. Juki's 6'5", my son. My brother and my son were the only two people who were strong enough to get Dad off the floor when he would fall down. And he would fall down because he was trying to walk to the bathroom and he wouldn't want to bother my mom. He was like dead weight. You know what I mean? It was like because he's paralyzed and he's older, and by the end, Juki had to run and get a neighbor's help once to get him off the floor. He couldn't even do it. And this was like literally a piece of paper I was holding in my hand. It's like, I even went to Google and Googled the weight of the soul, you know, that 21 grams film. And it's 21 grams. I'm like, that's not possible, because when he left his body became very, very light. So he gripping, holding on, you know? It was really like a weight he was carrying. So that was relieving, but it took literally hours and hours and hours for us to calm down. Like my heart was beating through my chest. We were all so full of adrenaline because of the 2 minutes, and Dad, you got to get this drink down. And then it was so painful. His last words were the words you see there. You know, they weren't peaceful words. They were, it tastes, terrible taste, it hurts, you know. After trying to prepare a good death, to have those be the last moments, you know, and I'm like, can I just give him another bite of sorbet, you know? And now, since the film's come out, they have flavored drinks in California. They have chocolate, they have vanilla, so that's better. And they have one drink instead of 3, but it's still 2 minutes. But now you can get the medicine in 2 days, which is also the case in Washington State and Oregon, which we loved the 15 days because it gave us a chance. You know, when Dad was in the hospital and he felt like a failure, and he felt like, it seemed he felt that his life was a burden to all of us, you know? And I was like, if he leaves, you know, I broke down to my partner Morgan saying, if he dies in there, I don't know how I'll go on. If he doesn't come to realize that he's given us everything. You know, he thought he'd given us nothing. And it's like, he was unconditionally loving our whole lives. He didn't try to be good. Like we all try to be good. He was good. He just was good. My sister came out as a lesbian. She was at Yale. It was like parents' weekend. You know, they came up there. My mom was stunned and sort of horrified. It was 1989. She had no education in this. My dad instantly leaned across the table and said, "I'm so glad you found love." Yeah, he just did that kind of thing. He was like our North Star. So it was hard to see him go out that way. But it was also like at the end of the day, he was where he really, as you could see, he was like, let's take it. You know, he wanted to go. He said, am I cleared for departure?
Yes,
Yeah.
It's very beautiful that you're able to honour your father using your lifelong skills, and that they are commensurate with celebrating the life of a man you evidently so dearly love. How beautiful that those things have come together in that way. I'd love to give your audience a chance to ask some questions, and it seems this man's so excited. So we're going to need a dose of that drink for everyone in here. But before you finished your rampage, go on. You've got a microphone there. If you need one, sir, perhaps you can holler it.
Is it working? Is it on? Oh, okay. All right. So, Ondi, thank you very much for that. I'll have a question, but firstly, I'd like to say that I'm very, very touched by the film. It must have been an incredibly difficult thing to do at times, and I just think it's an extremely brave move. So I just wanted to get that out of the way.
Thank you.
I think I'll be able to carry on. I've got just looking through the amount of that I got to know your father through looking at that film is quite incredible. Just the little bits, you know, and you don't see. It's just afterwards when you kind of like just your mind just flicks back 5 minutes or 10 minutes. It's quite fascinating, some of the things that you've included in there. He was clearly a very generous person, and he was so obviously burdened by this this thing that hung over him, that he was a burden to you, or he felt a burden to you. Stop me if I'm going too far here, but did you ever feel at any point, from when he started to talk about religion and the afterlife, that possibly that was just a longer planned gift to you guys to make you feel better as things came towards the end?
I've thought about that. I have thought about that because I think that he would do that. He was that generous that he would say, I will watch over you. But he really wanted so badly to do that. Like, that's why one of my favorite moments in the film is when I say, Dad, you know, if you could have a new life and a new body, you should take it, because we're good. You know, I'm a filmmaker, Rachel's a rabbi, David's an editor, everybody's fine, you've done great. We can go on. And he says, I don't want total freedom. I want to watch over my wife and my children and my grandchildren. And if there's anybody who could be watching, it would be as a person as intent as he is, you know. So if there's a way that he is, I'm sure he is, you know. And I just think we have to give him the benefit of the doubt. So, which I do doubt. I am agnostic myself in a lot of ways, but I also have had some indications.
What do you mean?
One time, right as I was finishing the cut for Sundance, the Avid, which is the editing system, you guys are BAFTA, so you know that, crashed. Well, first of all, it wasn't saving, and I was pulling one of my crazy benders where I just was going on for like 18 hours, and I had a deadline. It wasn't just crazy, it was a deadline, and it wasn't saving, but it wasn't crashing, so I just kept cutting. And I had about 8 pages of written notes, but I probably did like 1,000 other edits. And then it just around dawn, my partner Morgan went to bed around 1, and when around dawn, it crashed, but like fatally crashed. You know, crashed like where it seemed like even the hard drive was not retrievable. I tried all the usual tricks, nothing came back. And then she came in and found me like kneeling in front of the Avid in a prayer position. And I was praying to Dad, and I said, Dad, you know, I know you said you were going to watch over, and you were pretty intent about that. I know this might be beyond your technical capacities. But I'm really tired, and if I will start right at the beginning again and try to remember everything I did, but if you could just fix this somehow, I would really appreciate it. It would be great. I'd love to get some rest. And she's like, honey, what are you doing? You know? So I explained to her, and then we hit the button, and it like whirred and swooshed and everything. And then I had tried it like 20 times before that. And then it just, all of a sudden, it just came, a picture of my sister giving the final sermon just came on screen. And then all of a sudden, everything just started to fill in like that. It was really amazing. So I called my mom and got her out. I said, Mom, get out of bed. We're going to Dad's grave to say thanks. The other thing is that peacock that I saw on the first day showed up every day of Shiva, which is, you know, the period of 1 week after, which is, by the way, if I wasn't Jewish, I would have converted after Shiva. It's a great idea because you just basically don't do anything for a week, and you just sit in meditation, and friends send you food, and you just think about your departed loved one. It's a great tradition, whatever religion you are. Anyway, every day my mom would show up because my sister would lead a Shiva from like a service, a remembrance. Actually, some of the audio of my sister talking about how he never complained, always kept rooting for us, that is derived from her speaking over Zoom in a Shiva. Every day my mom would pull up, and the peacock, that same peacock, which we never saw, but the day he died, that Dad called unflinching, would greet her at her car. And then it started sitting outside my editing bay. And people in the neighborhood started talking about, we have a lot of peacocks, but everybody was talking about that peacock. They were calling him the king, the duke, because he just had the longest tail feathers. And he's still around. He still comes and says hi. So that's kind of, I don't know, it's comforting.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
You never know.
A peacock and a saved edit. I'd take both of those sides. There's we'll pass it back. This person here with a hat, and then there's a man over here.
One of my favourite quotes is, deep assignments run through all our lives. There are no coincidences, J.G. Ballard. And I wonder if perhaps following that principle, you became a filmmaker in order for this. This is your ultimate assignment. But as a filmmaker, you know that self-care is really, really important when you're dealing with sensitive material, and you edited this. So not only did you go through it, and boy did we go through it with you. My God, I don't think I've cried in a film that much for I can't remember when. It's so powerful, but you were going through that over and over and over again in the edit. Like, how did you do that? And did you have any what self-care did you put in? And you don't even have a shared credit, right, in the edit. You did it.
No, yeah.
So can you just talk about how did you build a framework around yourself to be able to do it? Because you have to have 3 gazes when you're cutting. You're thinking of you're there going through it. You're then the director, and then you're the viewer. I mean, that's extraordinary.
Thank you. I on the self-care, I just stretch, just yoga and then walking the dogs. Not a lot. My partner thinks I don't exercise enough, but I feel pretty good. Meditate. He taught me that. You did. You guided me in that direction. And editing is just, of all the things that I've shot a lot, right? So I started when I was 19. I'm 49. And Dig, my movie Dig, was composed of 2,500 hours of footage, and I think We Live in Public was 5,000 hours of footage that I cut down to 84 minutes. And I don't know, you dropped off like 6 hard drives. You had hundreds of hours before I even started filming you. So cutting that was great practice. All of these films just gave me a lot of, it's just like second nature to me. Shooting and editing are just both. It was like the first time filmmaking was there for me on an emotional level, because yes, I did, of course, hone and perfect and find the match cut of Zhuki and Dad. I knew Dad taught Zhuki the turkey. I knew I could find that footage, things like that. But never before has a film come out of me so instinctually. Like, it flowed through me so fast too, because I was getting so much out of it also. Being able to spend time with Dad like that and using the objective eyes of the camera. These cameras, at the time, the therapist said to me, actually, you will be in shock. All of you will be in shock through this process. So I got a Nest camera, one of the surveillance cameras, because I didn't want the filmmaking process to intervene. I didn't want to have to label a card or note anything. So I kept that camera, and thankfully, when Dad calls Gigi to the bed, that's the only camera left, that's filming. I forgot about that camera too, but overall, it was just, I had this safety blanket of knowing that Daddy, because I couldn't remember him before I was 9, that I would remember him. And that's all I thought it would be. But as soon as he was alive in the Avid, it was just, I hadn't heard a lot of those things that he said. I was in the room. Like, for example, on his birthday, this is another weird thing, on December 12th, right before Sundance, I matched back I was just cleaning things up, and I matched back, and I found the scene where he says, Biden won and so did I. And like Rachel says, you've given us everything, but the one thing you could give us is to know that, for us to know that you're leaving this world light, that you're not carrying all this with you. Can you give us that? And he said, no filibusters allowed, or whatever he said, What a scene, and I was there. You can see her look over at me, but I didn't remember the scene because so much was happening emotionally for us, So thankfully, I documented, and I urge all of you to do the same in whatever way you can with your loved ones. My mom always says that in Q&A. She's like, if you can document your loved ones, and don't wait till the end even. And you don't need to wait to the end. Another filmmaker friend of mine went and left the movie and went and did the Vidui, sort of the deathbed confessional with her 84-year-old father, who's not dying, but she's just like, Dad, called him and was like, tell me what you're ashamed of, I mean, these things are not things we have to wait for. And I thought the biggest lesson was that we measure, to see Dad realize he measured his self-worth incorrectly, that the true measure is love, But the death I couldn't cut from the beginning. I couldn't cut raw. I could not face it. I I needed other people to do like rough cuts, assistant editors and stuff, to just like cut it down. And then as soon as it was, I just wept through it a few times, and then just started realizing, oh, this has to be in it, and this has to be in it. And honestly, Morgan, my partner, her score helped me a lot too. Just it's so grounding, you know, and it brings in this the sort of the ethereal and the grounding. She uses a lot of like piano and guitar and grounding instruments, and then she brings in this sort of ethereal tone, and it just, I would lay that down and start cutting to that as well, to just kind of, maybe it gives me a little distance, I'm not sure. But actually the camera made me more present. It was really, it did not mediate. And I think the film itself, that's the thing about it, is it's just, there is no mediation, you're really with us, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, well done. Thanks for that question. This person here has one. And do you have one, mate?
Hi, I have two questions. One, did your dad ever visit you in your dreams?
No, he
like you
hasn't.
mentioned. Okay.
Sort of.
Okay.
It wasn't really him. His body was sort of like back together. He was walking on, but it was like him. He did visit my brother, though.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. And second question, what was the joke, the bar joke that he told your sister?
Oh, it wouldn't be appropriate.
Oh really?
No, it's honestly, it's not that. It's that I can't really remember it. I mean, it's like something about a beard in the wrong place, you know? Yeah.
Oh, this gentleman has one.
I don't know if this is going to seem relevant at all, but the clarity of the voyage is the loved ones all on board, so it's just a voyage in the one direction and so on. And I'm just curious, was there ever a sort of, even a minor backlash among the loved ones saying, no, he should not be doing this, and then a group think that clarified that so that everybody was all on the same page about it? Does that make any sense?
Yes, and I think that at the very beginning, in that Zoom call, when you see us all grappling with his decision, and Dad, why are you doing this, you know, that was as close as it got to any kind of anybody really questioning it. It was really interesting too, you know, the night before it premiered, I thought, what have I done, putting my family on display like this and their most raw and vulnerable. I mean, I obviously had their permission, but it was really scary to me to be doing that, because also it was violating Jewish law. So for my sister, Reform Judaism, and she's the rabbi of the biggest synagogue in Brooklyn, and she's quite well known activist, social activist, political activist. I was putting her career on the line, you know, and she wrote an article for the Forward to kind of get in front of that, to say I was never going to not support my dad in his decision. You know, I mean, there was not a plane that landed where I turned on my cell phone and the phone did not ring with Dad having tracked the flight, you know. He was just there for each one of us, and same for my siblings, you know, in such a way that it was impossible to question his decision, you know. We talked about it with him, each one of us, and you saw Mom begged him the night before. Mom asked him to please just go somewhere where she could visit him. But she was in this terrible place, you know, where she just knew she couldn't take care of him at home anymore. And she still is, like, you know, a lot of back problems from it and everything like that. So she just wanted, and Rachel had lined up a bed at the Jewish Home for the Aged, and he had contributed so much money over the years that she was sure he'd be treated like a prince. He didn't care. He didn't want to do that. Like, if he couldn't be with his beloved wife and surrounded by his family, he didn't want to be here anymore. And who were we to be so selfish as to deny him that? You know, that's how we felt about it. But of course, every one of us had, I mean, my brother had like vertigo. You know, I mean, all of us were struggling really hard with it, for sure. Yeah. Yes.
It's not so much a question. I just want to say it's such a beautiful, important, powerful film, and to really thank you for it, because our culture just doesn't deal with death and dying. And in my generation, I've gone from a similar experience, and, you know, I'm Irish, but Liverpool Irish, watching my grandma being laid out, to the commercialization of this process, all through the process, not just your specific position, where children are not exposed to death and dying. We all don't see people die. We can see every manner of horrific death on the news or on the screen, but we don't see a real death until we experience it for ourselves. And then I've had the pleasure to be involved a lot with Himalayan communities who do speak about it a lot more. But yeah, when I was with my mum dying, it was the most beautiful, precious experience of my life. And I think, you know, it's choking me up because the film is so important and so powerful. And thank you so much for making this film.
Oh, thank you.
What a wonderful place to conclude our question and answer session. A round of applause for Ondi.
Thank you, Russell.
Well done.
Thank you so much.
Haven't you done so fantastically well?
Thank you.
Perhaps we'll take a little photograph with the audience as well before we go. Look, can we borrow a phone and then I can
Let's
take a
take one with this.
selfie? We'll get one that way and we'll get one that way. Well, you actually, why don't you direct it? I'll just operate. Should we take one
Are
that
we
way?
operating?
With that?
Okay.
Make sure your father's in. And should we take one facing this way so we have your audience in? And give us some sort of respectful but loving acknowledgement of your presence. Beautiful.
Aw,
Thanks, Ondi.
thanks, Russ.
Mwah.
Love you.
Well done. Thanks. Amazing. Thanks.
Yeah.
Annie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.